They say that time is the greatest of healers. These days, it often seems to be the philosophy for many games with their awful launches and subsequent patches. However, snark aside, it's also a phrase that's applied to games that didn't quite do so well upon release, at least critically. The gap between their initial release and the subsequent years of change in video game trends and saturation often leads to a second life, or reassessment. The unloved, the mistreated, the misunderstood. Well, that's the idea anyway. Of course, there will be games, as with any media, that never quite got their due. Their qualities were not appreciated at the time, nor their vision was never seen. They have a small niche audience of people who got it. They'll champion it, loudly, ever-growing. A cult classic is born. But that doesn't mean everything is a cult classic, nor does it deserve to be. Revisionism. The theory or practice revising one's attitude to a previously accepted situation or point of view. While it's always happened, it seems now, more than ever, people are looking back at the critical stumblings of games and trying to reframe them as something fresh or simply misunderstood. Whether this is down to an ever-growing dislike of video games media or straight-up nostalgia, it feels odd to see some of these games being painted as underrated gems. I bring up this topic mainly down to two certain games. Two games that pop up now and then, and the conversations around them. Rise, Son of Rome, and The Order 1886. Two titles that represented their console. Two games that shared similar weaknesses and strengths. Two games that were supposed to be bigger, better, leading to franchises, a legacy. But instead, were met with middling reviews. And the reality is, they were fairly rated at the time, and their qualities haven't changed. The one-time Kinect pusher turned hack and slash, Rise, Son of Rome continue Crytek's legacy of amazing visuals and production, but also decline in quality gameplay. Rise, upon its release, was met with middling reviews. The production was highly rated, with beautiful visuals and fairly good sound design, but everything else just fell flat. The campaign clocked in about 5 to 6 hours, following a pretty standard revenge story that allows for a fair amount of variation in environments. And it was fine, but that was just it. It never really exceeded more than that. The writing and performances were typically gravel-mouthed, macho-laced affairs that felt more like mid-card wrestling promos than anything truly dramatic or engaging. And again, this is fine, but it's safe. The real issue Rise suffers from is how limited the gameplay is. There's no depth, no real style or interconnecting systems that elevate the gameplay. Everything is just very formulaic. It was back then, and it still is now. Nothing's changed. We had better before Rise released, and we've had better since Rise is released. Tap the same combos, same animations, all style, no substance. That's how Rise was seen back in 2013. It's exactly how Rise remains in 2025. Of course, the game's image was not helped back then by the ludicrous decision to offer combo unlocks via microtransactions, something most people tend to forget these days. It feels odd seeing this game be revised and reevaluated as some sort of underrated gem, a misunderstood title that the critics were just too harsh on, when in reality, it was perfectly rated for what it was, and still remains to be perfectly rated for what it is. So why are people reevaluating this title as something more, something better? One theory is the hack and slash genre has somewhat rescinded as Souls-like have rose up. Given the love-hate nature of Souls-like, perhaps this yearning for full-blown return of hack and slash has led to some revisionism directed towards Rise. Maybe it's a dislike towards critics, or maybe this strange distrust we have towards any dissenting voice that isn't a certain social media account with an anime avatar and a blue tick in a monetized feed. Or perhaps it's just some good old-fashioned brand warfare on the eternal battlefield of Xbox versus PlayStation. Which brings us neatly onto the next game. The Order 1886 is almost a mirror image of Rise when it comes to this topic. A short, high-production game that never quite reaches potential. The console's poster boy for "look at how powerful our system is" has become nothing more than a genre piece. The third-person cover shooter looks great, but that's about it. Under the shine lies a generic 5 to 6 hour experience that fails to utilize its setting effectively. You're supposed to be hunting monsters and vampires, werewolves, but 80% of the game is just fighting other humans. Even the story fails to land, feeling like it exists purely to set up a franchise, which never saw further entries. Receiving mid-level critical reception upon its release, much like Rise, the Order 1886 exists somewhat of a forgotten footnote in Sony's history. The visuals, oh the visuals, so good they cut the screen into a letterbox. Which isn't a good idea given we're playing a third-person cover shooter, so I can't really see stuff when the screen is reduced even further, and it's not exactly cinematic. Another key issue that the Order 1886 suffers from, maybe a little bit more than Rise, is it tends to rip you out of control and throw you into a cutscene like Half-Life never happened. It was and still is a constant source of frustration, especially how the story never really gets going and then just kind of ends. Despite its high production, the Order 1886 felt fairly dated at the time, doing little to add or even try different things in the genre and still relying on QTEs in a period where people were getting pretty sick of them. Which is funny because this revisionism has also found us in a position where people are absolutely fine with QTEs once again. But the reviews for the Order 1886 were fair then and they're fair now. Again, much like Rise. Perhaps this revisionism is almost like this longing to return to the good old days as generations get older and realize that their youth is gone and the games they played as kids aren't the games they're playing now. It happens to us all. Now, make no mistake, this isn't me saying you can't enjoy these games, far from it. Absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying these games today. They're still worthwhile experiences that were products of their time marked with fair review scores. But it does highlight the issue of how dependent people are on a simple number to formulate their view and how they see a game, which is something we still experience this day. Anything not a 9 out of 10 is seen as bad, but that's a topic for another time. If both the Order 1886 and Rise were released today as full price titles, the complaints aimed at both would still hold true. They may be trips down memory lane now, representing different trends and ideas, but they're still just okay, and that's about it. Revisionism? Maybe. Rosy retrospection? Probably. And we're all victims of this. It's just how we handle it and understand that nostalgia and reflection is often biased. Did I ever mention how Wolfenstein 2009 is absolutely fantastic and the best first-person shooter ever released? Huh?